This is R.J. Rushdoony, Easy Chair number 400. We've been at this for some years now, and it is amazing to me that some of you have been listening since number 1, and you still are enjoying it. Thank you. This evening, Douglas Murray, Mark Rushdoony, and I are with the Reverend Dennis Rowe of the Westminster Biblical Missions, of which he is the General Secretary. He's going to tell us more about the problems that confront world missions today. But I want to read something to you. It's not from any Christian publication. Sad fact is, not much of this sort of thing is reported by most Christian publications. This comes from the New Yorker magazine, December the 6th, 1993, page 87. I quote, "There was one in particular the soldiers talked about that evening. She is mentioned in the Tutela legal report as well. A girl on La Cruz whom they had raped many times during the course of the afternoon, and through it all, while the other women of El Mozote had screamed and cried as if they had never had a man. This girl sang hymns, strange evangelical songs, and she had kept right on singing too, even after they had done what had to be done and shot her in the chest. She had lain there on La Cruz with the blood flowing from her chest and had kept on singing, a bit weaker than before, but still singing. And the soldiers, stupefied, had watched and pointed. Then they had grown tired of the game and shot her again, and she sang still her hymns, and their wonder began to turn to fear, until finally they had unsheathed their machetes and hacked through her neck, and at last the singing had stopped." Well, those soldiers were haunted by that. I hope some Christians will be haunted by this and the many, many stories that are similar. It's time something woke us up. Either that, we wake up, or else God is going to deal with us, and his judgments will not be easy. Well, Dennis, what would you like to deal with now?
It reminded me of a story that was told to me by one of our missionaries, the Reverend Alexander David, a fine man of God and faithful servant for over 40 years in Pakistan as a Christian pastor. And if you know anything about Pakistan, to be a Christian pastor for over 40 years, you know you have to be a tremendous man of God. Of course, he would be embarrassed by me saying that, very humble man. But he told me the story of a young girl who was converted, she had a Muslim name, and when she became a Christian, she wanted a Christian name, and so she took the name Esther. And he discipled her, baptized her, and her family, of course, threw her out. They were so embarrassed by her becoming a Christian. But that wasn't the end of it. After he had taken her in, given her a home in the village, someone crept in during the night and cut her throat and murdered her, probably one of her family members. And he told me that story, and indeed very moving. And I had the opportunity in my last trip there this past October to visit Esther Chapel, named in her honor, in the city of Sywall, formerly Montgomery, named after General Montgomery of note of World War II, the famous general. And it is a reality every day for the Christians in Pakistan that they could face martyrdom, face death. I am, still trying to deal with it coming back here, just the sharp contrast. How you can jump in an airplane and change worlds almost.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to wake up. There needs to be a clarion call to our people really to get serious about their faith in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And, what vehicle that will take, I don't know. My concern, I think of where the Lord looked at the people and his comment was that they are like a people without a shepherd.
Yes.
I think there are just far too many false shepherds with the flock.
Yes.
And that's the main problem if you want to put it on anything in our own. And why that is and what needs to be done, we need obviously good shepherds, good pastors to faithfully feed the flock as Jesus.
As the prophet said of the pastors, leaders, religious leaders of his day, my shepherds are all of them dumb dogs that cannot bark.
Well, this is a generation that is woefully ignorant. The Gallup poll that was done, they asked the people who were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the most common comment was the Beatles. If that's the case, it is any wonder that we cannot resist these false religions, false ideologies and philosophies that are just coming in. The neo-paganism that is inundating our own culture.
In my student days, when it was not as bad as it is now, one study showed that the college students who had been to Sunday school all their lives did not know any more Bible than those students who had never been to Sunday school. But in those days, of course, you did get some Bible in the public schools, which tells you how poor the quality of the Sunday school was.
We're more educated people than we've ever been, but we're really illiterate.
Yes.
We're not well read. The Christians aren't reading. That's one of my burdens as a pastor, is getting the congregations to read, the people in the congregation, the man in the pew. One of the things we're doing in Pakistan with that work is with Pastor David. I believe these are the golden years for this man, having labored in native Pakistani, pastored for over 40 years. He's now translating literature, good Reformed literature, into the Urdu language of Pakistan for the people there. We've translated a workbook on the Heidelberg Catechism. We've done Confessing Christ by Calvin Knox Cummings, if you're familiar with that little booklet. We've taken the Elders Training Manual from the Reformed Presbyterian Church of North America and translated that into Urdu. And then he has written his own book on which is to present Christ and Christianity to the Muslim. And so I think that's a tremendous legacy that we can have.
Yes.
And when you're doing things like that, God can take the lampstand out of this nation. I'm going to use it to be a bit allegorical, but where you're mindful of the light going out because this people refuse. They stop up their ears. And it's as though in Kings where it says, God says, I put a lying spirit into the mouth of all these thy prophets. And that it very well can be, the whole thing in Pakistan can turn around. In one sense, you see it, people are so hungry for the Word of God. Where we're ministering with the seminary and the Christian school, our director there, Reverend Din, said, well, rather than going out and preaching all the churches, I'll just meet here on Sunday and see who comes. And he has now over 150 people from the community meeting on Sunday mornings. Now, of course, you look at the rest of Pakistan, you see the millions who are without Christ, certainly far more of a majority perhaps than here. But we need to wake up as a people and know that we do not have the grace of God here because we deserve it. That's contradictory to the very understanding of that word grace. And we need to get serious about our faith, real serious. And that's not the mindset right now.
I'm afraid in too many of the churches in this country that are evangelical, the concern is not Christ's kingdom, because he said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness." But it's themselves. They're interested in going to the right church where they can meet the right man or woman, a right place for their children, and having their psychological and other needs met.
Well, that's the heart of the church growth movement today.
Yes.
It's, the whole approach is how to meet people's needs.
Yes.
Whatever happened to the glory of God
Well,
and the exaltation of Christ?
One couple very, very dear to our group went to one of the more prominent churches of this county when they first came here. It was ostensibly a good evangelical church. And when they were called on after their first visit to the church, they were asked to come to this and that group or fellowship in the church. And in response they said, "What does your church believe?" And the response immediately was, "What do you want us to believe?"
Oh, my. Oh, my. Well, that's sadly indicative of the climate today.
Designer churches.
Seeker churches,
Yes.
too. That's another popular name. And, of course, they changed even from calling them churches. They're centers now.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are such and such center,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't want to use the word church because it's offensive. But yet we understand that word. It has a very clear meaning to it. It's God's elect, his called out ones. I wanted to tell you also about the work in Hungary that
Yes.
Dr. Rapp, as I mentioned once, who's one of the founding missionaries at Westminster Biblical Missions, and he was the one who God used marvelously in South Korea, and that work has matured to where they don't need his oversight so much. Had a burden for Central Europe, and when the wall came down, so to say, he immediately went there and went to Hungary and began investigating, what are the needs there. And just to make a short story of it, in these 6 or 7 years now, this has been going, I've made a couple of trips there myself as General Secretary. The Lord has provided the way to begin a theological institute there. Now some might say, well, why would you do that? Because Hungary professes to have a Reformed church.
Mm-hmm.
25% of the people are part of the Hungarian Reformed Church. One of the things we began noting that, those who called themselves Reformed, they had no faith. They really did not have an understanding of what saving faith is in Jesus Christ. And then as we got to know the ministers and so forth, they were just inundated with theological liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
But they use a lot of traditional language, so a lot of naive Christians are taken in by that.
Yes.
But yet when you talk to them, they're Bardian by and large.
Yes.
Which, the bottom line is you can't really know God.
Yes.
And then the ecumenical movement that just dominates there, they'll have joint worship services with the Roman Catholic people, or the better people at their services. But they'll have Unitarians and Orthodox and anybody else. So we said, we need to investigate this further, and we went to the schools, the theological seminaries, and just filled with this, filled with unbelievers on the faculty and so forth. And I even made a trip there and then went to Holland and met with some people who had been working in Hungary to get some more background information. And then, of course, then they have women in the ministry. They have the charismatic movement, which is probably one of the better movements, sadly, in the Hungarian Reformed Church, because at least it's a little more biblically oriented. So we said, well, what we need to do here is begin a theological school to help train, godly young men, pastors, and give them a theological education to go back and serve in the Hungarian Reformed Church. Well, that the leaders there, they have a strange government. They have bishops. They have 4 bishops that break up Hungary, and then they have some other bishops in Romania and other areas, the old area of Transylvania. They began to be opposed to us pretty much from the beginning because, one, we're Presbyterian and we're not really in favor of the office of bishop, but that's a small point. Comparatively, we were willing to work with them. We said we want to have a school. We think we need one that's theologically orthodox and to help provide good pastors. Many of the ministers in the Hungarian church have, 3, 4, 5, 6 charges. And they can't possibly minister to all the people. But then, of course, there's all the theological problems as well, to have good ministers, faithful ones. And we tried working with the Hungarian Reformed Church, but the bottom line of it came that recently in this year where their synod, well, really not even the synod met, the bishops met, and basically have, made us persona non grata. We don't exist. Any student going to our school cannot be in their ministry. None of their ministers can have anything to do with us, and so forth. And they've been very heavy-handed about that. And so now, when the young men come to our school, they know that we don't promise them much in the sense as far as what the Hungarian Reformed Church does, because it's a state church still. The ministers are paid through the state. And so they're promised if they go there and go to their school, they'll have an income and they'll have a livelihood. Whereas with us, all we can promise them is that we'll try to give them the best theological education that we can. But we can't promise them anything other than that, but we think that's most important, and encourage them to serve Christ.
That's very important, because when the communist regime was replaced, there was a great deal of feeling in international circles that the Hungarian Reformed community had kept to the faith. And outwardly it seemed to be true. They maintained the old standards and all, but all reinterpreted in terms of Karl Barth.
Exactly.
And it's only been in the last year or two that throughout the Christian community, in this country at least, that knowledge of the tremendous change, the shift from the Reformed faith to Barthianism has become apparent. And this has been a very, very serious matter, because what has happened is that all kinds of aid did go to the Hungarian Reformed community under the impression that it was still what it had been, except for 1 or 2 leaders. And I was once told that except for the one seminary, all were still faithful. Well, it has become apparent, especially in the last year or 2, that this is far from the truth. Barthians are very good at concealing their basic lack of faith, and as a result they found the West very ready to accept them at face value. It is not surprising, therefore, that there are problems over there. The question will be, how many of the people in the congregations are still knowledgeable enough about the Reformed faith?
I'm afraid that even on that, it's very bad.
Mm.
Most that we've met, and the young men we have been involved with and helping and training would confess that the churches are filled with unbelievers, and most of the roles the people aren't even active. In fact, one of the problems we ran into, which I think demonstrates this, is that we had faithful pastors that we've tried to help and work with, and the people will come who never go to church, so to say, except for they have a child. Oh, well, then they want the child baptized, and the bishops have stepped in and made these ministers who are trying to be faithful baptize their children, even though the people are evidently unbelievers. And we've tried to help in providing men to help the pastors and all that, and these bishops have stepped in and threatened the pastors if they take any of our students, they're gonna be out.
Have they begun to start new congregations at all?
Well, this is where we are right now. I came to my own synod here because I do want the blessing, of Orthodox Christians here, the faithful church, and there certainly are a number of them. I've gone to my own synod, the Reformed Church in the U.S., and asked for our Foreign Missions Committee to look in helping us begin a new denomination in Hungary. We've also appealed to the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, which one of our teachers over there who goes back and forth is a minister here in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, who has Hungarian background, Dr. Clinton Foraker, and then also some of the men in our board who are in the PCA. So I'm trying to get those churches here that are Orthodox and Reformed and Presbyterian to help us to this work to begin, so that we're not just looking like some upstart, group doing our own thing, independent group, because the Europeans are especially, leery of that, and Americanism, if you will. They're our way of having 1,000 splinter groups of this and that. But we want one that's consciously, subscribing to the Bible as the Word of God, and that the Reformed creeds are an expression of an inerrant Word, and orthodoxy that must be maintained. But we're not just academic either. I want to say too that there's a real stress in our school, which by the way is named Karoli Gasper, which is like the John Wycliffe of Hungary, the Karoli Gasper Institute for Theology and Missions. That all of our students, not only are they involved in the academic studies, but we have them 10 hours a week working in the ministry. They're working among alcoholics, drug addicts, the people who are in most terrible conditions, economically, which there are a lot in Hungary. It's a poor country. And as well helping pastors, not trying to supplant them and so forth. And they are well received by the pastors by and large. But the problem we have is these bishops who, it's hard for me not really to get angry. Who are these men to stand in the place of God and forbid these young men to preach the gospel and to help the Church of Jesus Christ? It just really bothers me, because I know for them to come to our school, as poor as they are anyhow, that most of our students are from Transylvania, and you know the history of Transylvania.
Yes.
It's where the Hungarians have been disenfranchised from Hungary proper, and they're in the area of Romania and so forth, right on up into Ukraine. So to come to our school, they're poor enough, as they say, but they really forsake everything, every kind of security you could imagine. Why would they do that? Because they so love Christ and His Word and want a thoroughly biblical education. And these are dedicated young men. We have 30 students. May not seem like a lot to the world, but these young men are dedicated. We're now hoping to organize a ministry in Romania. Our students are going into the Ukraine. They're into Bosnia and Herzegovina. They're in the Balkans. They're going all throughout that country now. And we're helping some of them of our graduates now that our school's been going long enough to even establish a ministry. And hopefully this coming spring, I'm going to go over there and some representatives from the OPC and the PCA and my denomination, and ordain some of these young men and to begin that work. So it's a real matter of concern and prayer.
The whole revolt against Ceausescu in Romania began in the Reformed community, headed by a prominent Reformed pastor, bishop, and it gave to the Hungarian Reformed community a tremendous prestige internationally, so that it has made it more difficult for them to appreciate what is actually happening there. I know that one or two of the leaders came to this country, were widely received in Reformed circles.
Lauded as great Calvinistic leaders. Yeah.
I know that when I was at one church, I was introduced to one such man who listened with apparent approval to everything I had to say. And yet I subsequently learned that he didn't have any regard for anything I had to say.
Yeah, I know who you're speaking of very clearly. We visited his office, and he's just taken in all the money from the World Council of Churches, and has literally, in relationship to us, forbade any of his people having anything to do with us. In particular, one pastor who is an evangelical, that's a good term over there, by the way, that wanted one of our young students. He had taken him as an intern and said, you know, he's a fine young man, very helpful with the youth and the other congregations that I have. And so said, when you graduate this year, you come and you can work with me. This particular bishop found out about that and stopped him cold. And he said, you will not take anybody I don't appoint. And he put in a man to be his assistant, and this pastor, he's not even a believer. He's not even a believer. This is the kind of things they're doing. And here we've had, you know, quote unquote conservative Reformed Christians here who have attacked us, who have published fraudulent letters against Dr. Rapp and myself regarding this, lauding the Hungarian Reformed Church as this great historically Reformed church. I wish it were. You know, we're trying to help that it would reclaim, you know, the real meaning of the Second Helvetic Confession, which is found in Scripture, not in a Bardian, you know, view of Scripture.
Well, one of the problems that makes it difficult for causes like yours is that when the doors were opened in Eastern Europe, a great many fly-by-night people who claimed to be fundamentalists or good evangelicals rushed in, made all kinds of promises to people there with no intention of keeping any of them, but they wanted to claim a tremendous field of opportunity and great works that they were accomplishing. This is being used by the Russians to bar all Christians from the West. It's making it difficult for outside groups to do anything. But the very, very grim fact that is beginning to come home to more and more people is that whether it's in the old Soviet Empire or Central Europe, the churches that were persecuted learned nothing from their persecutions. They have come out of it too often the worse for it, or else still holding to their ancient bigotry and prejudices. So I do believe it's going to take outside activities and efforts to reclaim those areas for Christ. Dennis, there's more I'm sure you want to tell us about Hungary, and I think it's especially important because in the Central European countries, the Hungarian position is a very, very important one. Hungary, if you're not aware of the fact, represents racially a non-European group. They were, like the Finns, people from the Far East, Mongolian,
Right.
a fierce, warlike people who spread death and terror wherever they went. They were a real threat to Europe for some time, and for a period it seemed as though they might reach the Atlantic, overwhelm France and other countries. Well, when they were Christianized, they became a great Christian people. And they were very early an important stronghold for the Reformed faith. And the Reformed faith survived and prospered for a long time in eastern Hungary. Western Hungary tends to be Catholic.
Right.
The Reformed faith did not perish there as it did, for example, in Poland, where it was strong for a time. It also penetrated into the Ottoman Empire, and for a time, a very great patriarch, Cyril Lucaris, was a militant Calvinist. He was a generation after Calvin, or half a generation. And Cyril Lucaris was 3 times imprisoned by the Turks at the suggestion of the Jesuits. And when he got out, each time he continued his aggressive Reformed effort to turn the Orthodox churches into Calvinistic centers. The 4th time, the Turks killed him. But it left throughout the Middle East and Central Europe little pockets or memories of the Reformed faith. The one area where in Central Europe it truly survived and thrived was in Hungary. So it's very sad that during the Marxist regime there, the Partians were able to capture the church with the state's approval.
And I'm afraid that a lot of the good men and people were either suppressed or disappeared even under the Marxist regime. One of the things you point out there, though, is the fact of the need of the help for someone from the outside, so to say, but the difficulty of that. Well, the advantage we have is the fact that the nature of Westminster Biblical Missions work is to work with the indigenous people. So we have Hungarians who are either native to Romania or other parts of that world who can get in there much better than the ugly American, as we've even been called since going there. And so it's really encouraging to see that, and especially the zeal of these young men and their commitment. For example, the assistant to Dr. Rapp is a young fellow named Zoke Imre. Zoke is a graduate of ours now, and he's just a competent young man, very faithful and zealous for the faith. And he was just married this summer. But the circumstance of where we are in the school is that there's no place for him, and he can't afford it. We can't pay him that much to rent a separate place. There's no place for his young bride. And here he is, a newlywed, and he's separated from his bride. She's living with their family until we can find a place. But I mean, that just shows the dedication. And it's like that for all of them. I can just go on with example and example. And I see that's what God is looking for. These are faithful young men. These are dedicated men who will give of themselves completely for the cause of Christ and His kingdom. And in fact, interesting you note about the eastern side of Hungary. That's where we are located, in Miskolc, which is sort of like the Cleveland or Detroit of Hungary. It's a factory town. up in the Northeast. That's also where the bishop is probably the most friendly to us. He's more evangelical. And so that's where we are located. And you mind if I share a need with everyone on the tape?
Please.
This past year, we've seen the building that we were renting, and we've renovated a good portion of it. The fellow who owns it's just been raising the rent to now where we're paying $1,000 a month, which in Hungary is an exorbitant amount. So Dr. Rapp has found the property, and we have put the down payment down on the property for a new facility, even better facility, located in Miskolc, not far from the train station, which is advantageous to us. And the thing is that in Hungary, because of the nature of things, still the bad influence of Marxism and socialism throughout the country, and generations that still that have to be trained, new ones, because even though it's changed governmentally, a lot of people don't want to work. They want the state to do everything. So inflation is so bad, and loans are like 20% interest. We didn't want to do that. Dr. Rapp found a man with this property that would sell it to us on a 1-year note without the interest. Well, that's quite a step of faith on our part, and we gave the down payment, but which means we have to make a $17,000 a month payment for the next 11 months. But to do that, I mean, it would just save us so much, and what is at stake here is having this facility to do this kind of work in Central Europe. So I would just appeal to any of the listeners who would want to help that
please tell them how to make out the check and where to send it.
Well, to Westminster Biblical Missions. You can just put WBM Incorporated, and just note on the check in the place for a memo for Hungary. As simple as that. And send it to Post Office Box 602, Post Office Box 602 in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, 18407.
And I hope you'll very soon write another article for the report and describe this need, among other things, and
Pakistan, a classroom, $5,000.
Yes.
Builds a classroom.
Yes.
Now here's a classroom, and I can go off on 104 children with one teacher.
Well, please plan to write about these needs.
I'd be glad
and
to.
Also tell them where they can send their gifts.
Well, I'd be glad to. Just a note, because of Chalcedon's article already, we've had some response, and the Lord opening doors there, so I want to thank you about that. And even new opportunities for work. We've made new contacts in India through Chalcedon.
Well, as you know, we have several missionary groups associated with Chalcedon, and we don't feel that it hurts our cause, but rather improves it for our people to support them. We feel that we will be blessed as we use our publication to help all these causes.
That's a rare attitude today. It seems like everybody's so jealous for their own thing, and I think that's sad, because it's for the kingdom of God.
Well, we take a very great joy in being a part of these groups, and they being a part of us. We have no control over them, even though in one instance they're actually under our organization. But we allow them to have their own board and to make all their own decisions. The only thing is that their checks come through our auditor and our accountant for the annual reckoning and IRS report. But we think it's a privilege that we can help these groups.
No, I do too. I mean, men like Peter Hammond in Sudan, who I had the opportunity to meet for the first time. I'd heard about him for years. Tremendous man of God. Aaron Kayan, the work he's done in Zaire and his preaching, and Now his son graduated from seminary and
Yes.
getting ready to continue that work.
Aaron is on our payroll, and probably Peter will be, although he does get something from us, perhaps entirely so, before the year is over, the Lord willing. We feel we've got to step into the gap when other means fail.
Yeah, I think that it's important for the church to understand, I think sometimes, especially for the Reformed Church, the Presbyterian churches, the importance of missions gets lost.
Yes.
It seems like we're almost only thinking of struggling for our own existence, whereas, no, we live for the glory of God. And it's His favor that we want. And I've often noted that in Baptist churches, they have a better view about this sometimes. I've heard them say in a number of instances where they say that the foreign missions is just as part as this local mission starting out. And we're immediately from the beginning going to portion out so much for missions here and there. And, the Lord sees that. And that's part of the Great Commission.
Well, people forget that the church began as a missionary organization. Go ye into all the world was the commission the church had. The book of Acts tells us how they set about to do that. And now we've forgotten that. It's building up an organization, creating a hierarchy and a bureaucracy.
Well, that's a whole nother avenue that we can talk about. What is the cost for putting a missionary on the field?
Yes.
I got involved in missions a good number of years ago, and in the mid-'80s found out, we were giving to one missionary, and there can be circumstances. I'm not meaning to criticize every, man on the field, that's for sure. But one missionary costing over $40,000 a year back in the middle 80s. And then when I looked, what was being done? And it was really not much. Now, if you were running a business that way and you were hiring somebody to produce for you, you would expect something produced. Now, I know with the church we're loath to take any of Madison Avenue approach or any business approach to anything. Come on, give me a break. It's not good biblical principle. Jesus used a parable of 5 talents given to a man, 2 talents given to a man, and 1 man was given 1 talent. The man who was given the least hid the most, really. The guy who was given the most did the most with it even. And he was greatly blessed by it. He took those 5 talents and he went out and produced it. More with it. He was wise in doing that. And we need to recognize, what are we doing with the money that we are spending on missions? And one of the things I can happily say about Westminster Biblical Missions and what we're doing is that, there's not a great overhead. There's not money being wasted on some massive bureaucracy. My office costs maybe $400 or $500 to run a month. I am the bureaucracy, if you will, for Westminster Biblical Missions. I think that's wonderful, that I can see, money that's given go to that. And if anybody wants to help with the general fund, they can do that. But each missionary and each mission field has its fund, and it goes to that field. And we don't want some, big bureaucracy getting involved in that. We do not tax our missionaries. We don't tax on what they get. If you want to give to a certain project or something that they're doing, you can do that directly.
Well, today people feel you can't begin anything unless you build up a bureaucracy first of all. I know that people come here to see Chalcedon. Well, where is it? We have a school building. We have a small office building, very tiny, where the girls are almost in one another's way. And we have 2 small warehouses to house the Ross House books and the Chalcedon journals and that sort of thing. But we don't have an organization. We have 2 women running the office. That's it. And I believe yesterday and today the mail was better than 100 letters with a great many things to be done to meet what each letter required. Books being ordered, or journals, or back reports, or a gift to be acknowledged, and so on and on.
I can relate to that as a general secretary.
Yes. We're very, very much understaffed and short of space, but we've given the priority to what's happening out there.
Well, that's the thing. Your great burden is to see, if you will, the productivity of your ministry.
Yes.
Of what you're able to accomplish for Christ. You see, and not self-serving, what you're able to accomplish for yourself. And I've heard of some mission agencies where it's 50% of what the given missionary raises is going for, the overhead to someone else, not to the missionary's care and well-being. And I just think that's way out of proportion.
The Attorney General of California released a report today that the charitable groups soliciting funds in the state of California actually give to the charities 37%, slightly less than 37% of all that is received.
Did you hear the same one where there's some agency they were reporting on that a really large one, that the first $11 million that it raised went to the agency, and then when they made over that, then they gave to the charitable organization. $11 million. And then the report is that when they got the $11 million, they quit raising it for the organization. Yeah, that is sad.
Well, we need more grassroots concern and grassroots activity. And certainly your organization represents a basic honesty of approach.
Well, that's one of the things where I can be so encouraged by being involved in it. I'm not in it for the money, and I'm not saying it just to sell myself, but because I see the quality of our missionaries and the work they're doing, and I can say that, and that's what gives me great joy. And I'm humbled that God, allows me to be a part of it. I know what our missionaries are doing. I know how some of them give of their own substance. Our first general secretary, who labored for 17 years in over 17 years, maybe received a salary of $10,000 in 17 years of labor. If that. I doubt if it was that much. And it's just incredible, the dedication of these men.
Yes. Well, one of the things that drew me to you before I ever met you was to learn that as chairman of the Committee on Missions of your church denomination, you had a knack for troubling the conscience of a lot of people, and that's wonderful.
You don't always make a lot of friends doing that,
No, but the Lord blesses you for that.
Well, I thank you very much. Well, we need our conscience troubled. God does that to us. Those that are His children, He chastens. And we need chastening in the church today.
Yes.
To take away our complacency and to renew our zeal for Christ and His kingdom and promoting His glory throughout the world.
I often think of John Welch, who was John Knox's son-in-law, and the great work he did and the zeal with which he did it. His wife, Knox's daughter, would wake up at night and often find that he was not in bed. and she would go to his study and find him there wrapped up in a shawl, kneeling on the floor, praying agonizingly, Lord, give me Scotland or I die. It's no wonder that King James said that he had to be in exile, because he said, my throne will not be safe if that man is in Scotland.
Yes, that's one of the things when people write us, you bring up the whole matter of prayer. I don't just say it, just to use some kind of warm, fuzzy language to impress people, but the prayers of God's people are so important. And we can't underemphasize that. I see the people who are involved in the work. We just had our last banquet and board meeting at Quarryville, Pennsylvania, the Presbyterian retirement home. And to see the precious saints of God who really are a part of this work, who are co-laborers. Little old ladies who are widows giving, from their little stipend they get on a fixed income, and who say, I'm praying for this work. They send me notes and tell me how they're praying for me. That just means so much.
Yes.
To have that. And I knew that when I went to Pakistan this time, and I was, tell you in the flesh, I was a little nervous about going. There was a lot of, apprehension knowing the circumstances there. But I just knew that God's people were praying for me. I sensed it this time more than I ever have. Now, some might take that a bit mystical, but I got notes, I got letters. I knew they were, and I just knew that I was compassed about with his heavenly host, and I'd much rather die in Pakistan than get hit by a car on I-80 anyway. So.
Well, it is interesting, some of these countries that these men go to, the poverty, the disease, and the filth all around them is such that visitors there have said you have to leave and take a good bath before you feel that the smell of the place is no longer clinging to you.
Maybe you don't want to hear my joke on that. Do you want to see Pakistan? I just coughed some up for you. That's one of the things to pray for our people there, especially Reverend Dan. He's 65 years old. He says, I'm going to die here. God's called me here. I can't leave. And he has asthma. And I mean, the filth is constant. The air is just blue from the pollution. They have all these two-cycled vehicles, no restraint. And then you have all the dirt that's being caused by the hordes of people. They don't even know how many people live in Lahore in that area. And it's just the worst possible conditions. Open filth, flies everywhere, disease, unimaginable. And, yet he stays and labors in those conditions. So to think of it, to pray for him. He's a giant in the faith, a man of God, and who stays there, native Pakistani, who's gone for the 25, 30 years of laboring there among those people. And I think we're starting to see the fruit of that when you see Calvin Academy go in 6 years from 0 to 900 students. And then the second campus, 150, and now I the privilege, as I told you in an earlier time, to cut the ribbon on a third campus. This is Calvin Christian Academy in Pakistan. And see these children, I have lots of pictures I brought back, as I went there, and to see these little waifs that would be hopeless have this opportunity. It's just marvelous. But the thing that breaks my heart is that we have to turn children away because we don't have the means. I can't hire more teachers. I can't build more classrooms.
Send some of those pictures to Andrew to be used in your next article.
Oh, I'd be glad to.
Douglas, do you have a last question or comment?
Well, you're mentioning about the military build-up or presence in Pakistan. What's their population situation? I read recently some demographics that they estimate that Pakistan will be one of the 4 most populous nations on the face of the earth within the next half century.
Well, they're growing at a great rate, but it's 140 million people. And it's not as large as us, but then again, you got to look at the land area, which is much smaller. That's like putting 140 million people in Texas. And with most of it desert. Most of the people live in the Punjab, and that we're right in the middle of it, where our ministry is, Lahore, and then in the village ministry we have with Pastor David. Which, by the way, I forgot to tell you, when I went over, I took money and we bought a van. We're going to have a Christian bookmobile.
Good.
Take this literature out to the Christian villages, because the Christians have to live, and they don't have a way to get books. So at least their leaders can have books, the ones who can read. But demographics. I mean, it's growing like wildfire. They have no restraint on how many children they have or anything like that.
Mark, do you have a question or a comment?
No.
Well, Dennis, thank you for coming.
Most
We're
welcome.
very grateful to you. We do hope you will find time to write another article soon about your work and the needs of the work. God bless you, and God prosper your ministry and your family.
The Lord bless you and give you another 80 some odd years.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening, and good night.